Hello, is this thing on?
Do you think they can hear us?
Nah, let's say it again. Hi, and welcome to the Gritty Nurse Podcast, an unfiltered discussion related to health and healthcare. My name is Amy,
And my name is Sarah.
and we are your podcast hosts.
If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio, Amazon, or any other podcast listening platform, don't forget to subscribe so you can get updates to when we have our latest episodes. Also, don't forget to rate and review us.
And if you like what you're hearing and you love our advocacy work, don't forget to go to www.grittynurse.com and click on the donate button.
As little as $1 or $2 a month for a total of $12 a year will help us with our monthly podcast costs, such as website hosting, our hosting platform,
audio equipment, and the time and energy it takes us to put out good quality episodes. We thank you and we appreciate you. Hi and welcome everyone. We have a really great guest. She's been a really great friend of ours, nursing advocate, so strong. I mean, she's been through a lot of shit, but you know what? She's a fellow podcaster, Uncensored, nursing Uncensored. Like she is another leader, another champion, and I can't wait for Sarah to introduce her today.
I'm equally excited to have you, Adrienne, because I think we've been talking since last year. I think it was the end of the year about how we were going to go on each other's podcasts, and we recorded with you, and we've done a couple roundtable videos with other nurse podcasters. But finally, you're here, and you're going to come on our podcast. So I would like to introduce Adrienne. She is a med-surg float pool nurse. Prior to this, she worked as a night shift pulmonary step-down and palliative care nurse for 5 years after becoming an RN in 2016. Adrienne attended community college where she earned her ADN. She started working soon after passing NCLEX and entered an RN BSN program at the same time. She completed her BSN through the University of Iowa College of Nursing in December 2018. Before becoming a nurse, she was a CNA for 11 years. Adrienne also has a podcast that she started in 2017 called Nursing Uncensored. Welcome, Adrienne.
Thank you. I'm really excited to officially talk to you on your show. We talk all the time anyway, so this just feels like a natural extension of the conversations that we have anyway.
Absolutely.
But yeah, we get to do this officially on the Gritty Nurse podcast. So I'm excited to do this.
Yeah, I feel like we have a lot in common, even though we live in different countries and we've worked in different areas, and we face different but very similar challenges. I'm just wondering if we could start by you telling everyone how you got into nursing.
Yeah, so it's actually an interesting story because I did not, people usually either have a story of I grew up wanting to be a nurse, my mom was a nurse, my aunt was a nurse. I didn't have that. And I didn't have the story of I had someone that I love fall sick and I saw how amazing nurses were. That's another really common story. I became a nurse kind of by accident. I found myself in my early 20s by circumstance and happenings of that time. I found myself unemployed, and I had a friend who was doing home care for disabled adults in the area that we lived in. And she was like, you know something? You would be really good at home care. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm cut out for it. And she was like, no, trust me, you'd be great at it. You'd get along with these people really well. You're a natural caretaker. So I got a job with a company that provided lay health care in the community. People with various ranges of mental, emotional, and physical disabilities were living in the community. This company got them together in 3-4 people that had complementary personalities, got them together, put them in townhouses, helped them find apartments. And then they would have staff come into their homes, whether they needed few hours a day, many hours a day, or 24-hour care. And we all got to be kind of like, there were professional boundaries, but we all kind of got to be like friends. Like the staff were friends with each other. Are the individuals we took care of kind of all knew each other. It was like a big community. And I got to work at a lot of different homes that this company staffed for. And so I did that for a number of years and really loved it. And I would work 20-hour shifts. I would, go and pick these individuals up from their day programs, from school, wherever they were spending their time during business hours, take them home, help them do activities of daily living, recreation, help them with personal cares, help them get ready for bed. I would sleep there on site, and then would help them get up, get ready in the morning, and do activities of daily living, get them, out to the bus or take them to work or their day program or whatever. That was my 20-hour shift. And I found myself working like 90 hours a week. So
Jeez.
that was how I got used to working with patients with spinal cord injury and muscular dystrophy and various different, seizure disorders and autism and all these different things that kind of became normal things for me. Like these were the people that I spent my time with and learned how to care for and learned and like actually not just like provided care for but cared about.
Yeah, that's super cool.
Yeah, it was a great job. It was one that was really exhausting. I'm glad I was in my early 20s cuz I was like sleeping on couches and not going home for a couple days at a time.
Hmm.
And then, time passed and I got a job in a hospital because I had, I don't know, experience with like Hoyer lifts and, taking care of basic CNA work and, med passes and things like that. And then someone was like, yeah, you're a natural CNA. Why don't you think about nursing school? And I was like, maybe I should go to nursing school. And then the whole nursing school story is like a whole other saga in and of itself. But yeah, so I went from someone saying, like, hey, you should come do home care to working in a hospital to, struggling my way through nursing school and then becoming a nurse. So it's a long
Hmm.
story, but it's an interesting story because it was all kind of like one random friend being like, you'd be really good at this. And she was right. She like changed the entire direction of my life. Because before that I was like selling insurance.
Oh wow, I did not know this about you.
Working in a call center, like,
Yeah.
yeah, so
Oh my gosh, could you imagine if you're still doing that
no,
today, working in a call center?
no, no, mm.
I have one random question though. When you were
Yeah.
doing the 20-hour shifts, did you get paid the same at night or was it like less?
So the particular company that I worked for at the time, the rate was the same because it wasn't very much. But for a lot of companies, they do pay you like a lesser rate when it's quote unquote sleep hours. But truth be
Mhm.
told, for a lot of those nights, I wasn't sleeping, or if I was sleeping, I was only sleeping a few hours. And that was kind of how I started making the deep slide to night shift because, my folks my people that I, help take care of, they were on some medications that made them sleep pretty soundly for pretty long periods of time just because they were so tired. They went to their day programs, they had pretty rigorous days, and then they came home and they slept hard. So during those
Mhm.
hours, I would, even though they, did their ADLs and their chores and stuff, they had goals that they would keep. So they're doing, dishes and, keeping their own apartments clean. But then I would go back over things just to make sure that everything was done properly. So, I'm cleaning the house and documenting and, doing care plans and things like that. So I was still up kind of late and, then I'd read, watch TV and sleep a few hours. So I think that's how I started becoming the nocturnal creature that I am today. So, but no,
I,
the wage was the same.
oh no, too bad, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
think that if I was I think if I was in your position, I'd probably end up doing the same thing. And I don't know if that's maybe my personality, that I'd be like feeling a little bit bizarre to sleep in someone else's environment and then
Yeah.
knowing that I'm still caring for them. But yeah, like I'm kind of a night owl too. Nights were the best. Like that's a whole that could be like a whole other podcast episode,
Yeah.
because nights was like where like you knew management wasn't going to be around. You knew that you can get away with some crazy drama. Night shift was like the
I
place to
mean, I
be.
know there were nights that, that was back when I had like the Nokia phone where like in order to text you had to like hit the button
Oh my
3
goodness.
times.
The
The
T9, I
T9
could
texting,
never get
yeah.
the hang I could never get the hang
Well,
of
let me
it.
tell you, I could text like rapid fire. So I was probably like texting for most of the night, texting with like the other caretakers that are at like the apartment building across the courtyard and stuff. We were all kind of friends. So yeah, that was, and
There was no video or photo sending back then, It was really basic. I bet anyone listening that's of a certain age, like in their 20s, they won't even know what we're
they're
talking
probably
about.
like, "What did
But
you do? Like, you just sat there, like, in a room with, like,
like there
no."
was no YouTube and there was no
Yeah, no,
Netflix. No.
nope. And, if I worked at other, apartments or, other locations, there were residents that would stay up later and, were working instead of in school. Like, one of the individuals I cared for was in high school still. So it just depended on where I was and what I was doing
Right,
and,
right.
what it was like, but it was think I haven't thought about that job in a long time, but there were some fun times, so it wasn't just a job, like it was actually kind of enjoyable. Like I enjoyed the people that I worked with.
Right. Well, that's like an excellent first start, right? I mean, you're right. Most times people have those traditional, like, my mom is a nurse or whatever, like that, like you said. And I mean, I think that's still like a really, really cool way to kind of get into the profession. So yeah, I that was a great story. So
That technically wasn't my first healthcare job. So my first job was actually, my first healthcare job was when I first moved I grew up in the Chicago suburbs, moved
okay.
to Iowa, and I actually worked in a women's healthcare clinic when I was 18.
Hmm.
That was in between, that was before like the insurance job and like, pulling away from that. But yeah, I worked in a women's healthcare clinic from the time I was 18 till I was in my very early 20s. And we did woman gynecology, abortion services, school physicals, education. So, I did everything from, front desk work to, doing sex toy workshops.
Ooh,
There's all sorts
Interesting.
of stuff that we did.
Progressive.
Yeah, and this
sex
and this
toy
was me
workshops.
coming straight from Roman Catholic high school in the Chicago suburbs. So, I'm sure my mom had at least 15 heart attacks that year. But yeah, that was my introduction. But then, I quit that job because I wanted to move on to a little bit better pay, and I was new to the city and I wanted to try other things. And then I went on a series of other jobs. But then, of course, but that was like before I thought about healthcare or being a nurse or, that to me didn't register as like I
Right, right.
belong in healthcare. But that was my, I'm a teenager, I'm an activist, I'm a punk, like that whole kind of. So yeah, but that was
Oh,
the
you're
first healthcare job.
all right. We're definitely gonna circle back to that.
Okay.
But
Okay.
before we do, just a couple more like little personal questions,
Sure.
if you don't
Sure.
mind. So,
Sure.
like, you're a fellow podcaster. So, tell us a little bit about Nursing Uncensored and why you decided to get into podcasting.
Yeah, so I actually, when I was in nursing school, I listened to a lot of podcasts myself. And one of the podcasts that I loved the most, I don't know if I should say the name of the podcast, but I listened to a podcast on my way to and from classes. And the first podcast that I really dug into and loved listening to was called Weird Medicine with Dr. Steve. And you're nodding your head. Have
Yeah,
you
I've
heard of
heard of
this
it.
one
Yeah, yeah.
before? Yeah. So I was listening to it. This was circa like 24. So I graduated in 2016 and I did a 2-year program. So like 2014, I started listening to Weird Medicine. And for those of you that have heard it before, I believe, and I might get this wrong, it started as like a Sirius XM radio show. And so it really
Okay.
was uncensored. Like they talked about, but they were like even more off the rails than I was. And when I was listening, and again, I don't know how it started, but they would take calls on like voicemail or answering machine. And this guy, Dr. Steve, and he had, like an osteopathic doctor, and who I believe is still on the show, and a friend of his who I think has since passed away, and, some other folks that would come on the show, and they would answer these questions that like people are scared to take to their doctor or are afraid to ask or don't want to Google because God knows what'll come up in the browser window. And so it's a lot of questions that are like about areas of the body that people are scared to talk about, or about bodily functions that people are scared to talk about. And some of it is kind of crass. It's not the kind of thing you want to listen to in the car with your parents in the back seat. Um, but then I caught myself like in class, and the teacher would ask a question and I would be like, "Oh my God, Dr. Steve talked about that. I know the answer to this." And I'd raise my hand and I'd be like, "Well, there's a ligament that runs from here to here and it helps the penis stand up." And they'd be like, "How the hell do you know that?" And I'd be like, "Well, I heard it on Dr. Steve. They were talking about the ligament that makes the penis stand up when it's erect. And I don't know how I know that." And then I was like, wow, this is a great way to learn, and I'm remembering it cuz it's funny and it's dirty, and like, so I started learning all this random stuff. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if there was a nursing show like this where we could talk about the stuff that's not quite academic. It's maybe a little off the rails for like classroom talk, but it's still stuff you need to know because people have these parts of their bodies and these
Right, right.
questions. My show has kind of gotten away from that a little bit. I keep, swinging back and forth between like interview Q&A stuff and then going back to talking about stuff that makes you blush, but that was the inspiration for it.
That's really cool. So
Yeah.
this is kind of funny because like my next question kind of leads to that. So like you've been able to connect with a variety of different people. Who would you say that you look up to? Would it still be Dr. Steve, or is there someone else that still inspires you to do what you do?
Okay, so this is going to be kind of a wishy-washy answer, but it's not wishy-washy. So I get from different podcasts and different nurses or providers or whoever, I get different things from each of them. And so there isn't particularly like one person that I say like, wow, they're really great. I want to be like them, or I want to have content like them. But there are like little things that I take away from everybody that I'm like, wow, like you guys, I
Hmm.
love how you guys you tackle things pretty head on. Like, I love that you'll pick a topic and then there's no beating around the bush. You guys really talk about these things. You dig in deep. You're very candid about things, and I think that really makes these conversations count. I feel like, and your guests really can get into what they want to talk about because there's not this whole hinting at things. You say what you mean. Other people I go to, like I love Katie Kleber's videos because like when I started precepting new nurses, I listened to some videos she did and it taught me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps that I can take to like be a better preceptor. And I was able to listen to that before I went into a shift and take those tips and actually put them into action. Different people, I get different things from them. Like with Dr. Steve, I took away from that show the ability to like close the door with a patient and sit down and say, okay, this is not the most glamorous conversation, but like Vegas, what happens in the hospital stays in the hospital.
Right,
So
right,
let's
right.
talk
I
about
like
this.
that.
Tell me what's happening when you're trying to go to the bathroom and nothing's happening. Like, let's talk about this. Let's get to the heart of it and figure out what I can do to help you. So like I take different things away from different nurses. I think that that's what we need to do anytime we're reviewing content, is like glean the little pieces that are important to us, because
Right, right.
no one person is going to give us everything that we need. Some nurses, I'm like, well, you're a little too sing-songy sunshine for me, or you're a little too business for me, and I like to be a little bit more casual. So you
Right,
have to
right,
take
yeah.
those things and kind of pick and choose what works for you, and make them into your like own recipe, for you and your patients. So those are, I've just mentioned a few just off the top of my head, but those are ones that I really think, just like kind of come to me just without putting too much thought into it.
No, I know you're an avid podcast listener because you have talked about it, and I know you've listened to ours, and we listened to yours as well. And it's just great that we can come together, like even though we're so far apart, we just have so much in common. And when I meet a podcaster now, I feel like I I know the struggle. I know what you're going through. I know what it is to put out content week in and week out. Like, it's hard.
Yeah.
There's been a few podcasts that I looked up to in the beginning and they've kind of faded away, but I still got a lot from them, and when we were new and just trying to start out. And I also know that we both started, like all of us started with no knowledge of audio recording or editing or using social media to like figure things out. Like, we just kind of did it. And my advice to anybody that wants to start a podcast is to just start. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to make it look or sound a certain way. Like, you just need to do it.
And my first episodes, like if you go back and listen to the Nursing Uncensored episodes chronologically, the first ones sound like garbage. I was literally recording them with an app that recorded phone calls like on my phone. Like, I started this podcast with my friends Brad and Andrew. We literally recorded episodes while like Andrew was driving across the state of Wisconsin, and the call kept dropping. So we
Oh
just
god.
kept like piecing the bits of recordings together. Sounds terrible. So I think it's funny when like I read iTunes reviews and it's like, your quality's terrible. Get a new mic. And I'm like, that episode is 4 years old. Like,
Yeah,
listen
and
to the
it's
new one.
definitely, yeah.
Yeah,
Jeez, oh my goodness.
you
We
know.
understand the struggle. Absolutely.
But it's true. It's like now, I have like a fancy mic that I'm not even sure I'm using correctly, and I have, a mixer, and I'm up. Yeah, I've upgraded, and people are like, "Wow, the sound is so much better." Um, I interviewed the boot nurse recently. That episode will be coming up, and he was like, "Your sound is Gucci," and I was like, "Yeah."
Yes. That's what
Nice.
you
That's like
want.
the biggest compliment.
But he said that he first went and listened to one of the earlier episodes, and he was like, "Ooh, I don't know." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's because when I started out, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I just
Right,
knew I
yeah.
wanted to talk." The other thing I wanted to say about nursing podcasts is there's so much to talk about, and there are so many different perspectives that I don't even feel a sense of competition among nursing podcasts, because I know that we can all be in this space, and we can all do something different, and we can all have a listenership because we're all hitting a little different. And like, even if I just like, while we were talking, I just pulled up like my Apple Podcast app, and there's so much that I love to listen to. And some of the ones that I go back and listen to, if I need tips or whatever, they're not even active podcasts. Maybe it's a podcast that I listen to and they stopped making episodes like 4 years ago or something like that. I think that you should never rule out these like old episodes or these old podcasts, because the content stands up for itself. Like, even like old episodes that like Nurse Nicole did. Yeah, like she's got some old episodes that are great. I don't think the Refreshments and Narcotics podcast has done an episode since 2020. That's a great podcast. I could go, the WOMED, they haven't put out a podcast in since March. There are so many great podcasts, and it's like, it doesn't matter that they haven't put out anything recently. Go back and listen to it all. And that's in addition to the stuff that's actively coming out now. And sometimes there are podcasts that they put out content regularly, but they may have big gaps in between their seasons, like Fresh RN, or content that Sean Dent puts out. Sometimes there's a big gap. They may not put anything out for months, but then all of a sudden they've got all these videos that come out, and I'm like, yes. The drought has ended.
Hmm.
There's more. But yeah, we're all doing such different stuff that I don't feel like, oh no, they're back. Like my numbers are going to drop. No, usually people are like, cool. Like I have all this content to listen to. I can go through and I can pick and choose what I want. So that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, and I think it's good that people like nurses listen to other nursing podcasts because it's your part of your continuous development and learning, right? So maybe even if you didn't take a formal course, you're still learning by listening to these podcasts and you're getting a lot out of it. And I think about all the time people spend commuting like you did. You could just easily just pop on a podcast and not really, have to think. You just kind of listen and absorb it. So this kind of segues into my next question about how I know that you moved recently to a new state
Yes.
and you started a new job on a new unit. What is it like being the newbie again? Like how does that feel after all these years?
So I knew it was going to be a challenge for me because even though I'm an experienced nurse, I'm an anxious nurse. Um, I
Okay.
I like to have, even though this is going to sound so like nurses are going to laugh and roll their eyes at this, I do like to have some sense of control in a sense that I like knowing who my providers are. I like knowing what to do in case of an emergency. Well, everybody likes knowing what to do in case of an emergency. That was kind of silly. But you know what I mean? Like feeling a sense of fluidity and fluency in the space that you're in. Now, people that don't need that are perfect travel nurses because they can just walk into a space and be like, I got it, I'm down. But the biggest problem for me, I've noticed that I've got the nursing down. I can walk in, I can talk to my patients. I, can talk to them about meds. I can do discharge education. That's no problem. I know how to assess a patient in Minnesota, in Iowa, in wherever. But the problem that I'm having is learning all of the providers, my CNAs, my LPNs, my coworkers, because everybody's got a mask on. When I
Right.
learned who everyone was at my old hospital, nobody had masks on. So they're like, that's Dr. Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I will never be able to find that person. I'll never pick them out of a lineup. Like I learn people by their voices. So if they like have an accent or if they have a very distinct voice, that helps. But that's been the biggest kind of like anxiety provoker for me. Somebody will come up to me and they'll be like, order the potassium protocol on this guy, or we're gonna give him 12 bags of potassium today for his K at 2.9. And I'm like, who are you? Like,
No, I hear
hi,
that.
I'm new. Are you internal medicine? Are you with urology? Like, what's your name? Nice to meet
Right.
you.
Hmm.
That nuance, I didn't even think about it. It didn't even occur to me that, if you start a new job in the pandemic, especially in healthcare, everyone's masked. Like you don't
Yeah.
know who's who. Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I think no, your anxiety is not unfounded. I can tell you that. I'd be
But
anxious too.
but I really like my new hospital because even though there were things about my old hospital that I'm missing, that I think we did really, really well, there are some new things, some new bits of technology, new protocols, nursing order sets that we didn't have that I'm like, oh, you mean I can just do that? I don't have to call 5 people first to make that happen. That's awesome. Or programs and protocols that we can run that like they have just ways of doing like heparin drips and insulin drips and those kinds of algorithms and things that just I feel are a little safer and make more sense. So there are little nuances and processes that I'm like, oh, this is great. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, the IV tubing sucks. I wish I could like grandfather in my IV tubing from. So there's all these little things that I'm like, yay, boo, yay, boo. It's like that all day long. But overall, it led me to realize that, like, if you're in a place and you're feeling frustrated, burned out, if you have the luxury to be able to go somewhere else, for me, it turned out to be a good thing. It made me realize that I'm capable enough that if I wanted to take a traveling position, that I could do that. And I don't think that I would have been able to do that, a few years ago. So it helped. This move has helped kind of uh, reinforce my own confidence and my own skills. So we also have an IV team
Hmm.
at this hospital. So my IV skills are
Woohoo!
going to
That's the
go out the
best.
window, but I don't care. I'm like, yeah.
Oh man, no, I loved actually having. I remember when I came into the hospital, it was like, again, I started a new job, and they're just like, oh yeah, like no, we've got an IV team, because I was thinking about like, oh, these particular nurses should know this competency. Oh well, they don't have to, because there's like a whole group, MLAs, we call them medical lab assistants, that come up and they do all the hard work.
Yeah,
But
like,
yeah, no,
I
that's
had
cool.
a patient whose port wouldn't draw. We were trying to draw labs off of their implanted port, and it just wouldn't. So I was, trying to get the patient to like reposition, move their arm. I call it the port hokey pokey, because you're trying to get them to reposition so the port will draw, and it wouldn't. So after some reasonable trying, I was like, man, this is going to take all afternoon. And then my preceptor was like, well, just call the IV team. And I was like, oh, they do that too? So it's like, yeah, they'll come up and do it. And they like TPA'd the line and stuff. And I was like, oh, I don't have to spend 45 minutes. I can go on and continue doing my assessments. That's amazing. So in
It's life changing,
it
right?
is. And I
Yeah.
don't even though, I'm talking very happily, I'm also, acutely aware of the fact that like we still have COVID numbers rising, and there's a lot of unpretty stuff happening in the hospitals, but I'm trying to be grateful for what good things are happening around me. So I don't want anybody
Hmm.
listening to be like, well, I'm glad you're having a good time, because I recognize that it is pretty difficult in a lot of places, even around me.
Yeah.
I'm working among nurses that are working with COVID patients as well. So
Yeah, but it's great that you recognize what kind of nurse you are, because I think I'd be the same way. I'd be comfortable with actually taking care of patients, but it's like the minute you leave that room, it's where is stuff? Like I'm terrible with directions. So it's like where are the supplies? Like how do I chart this? Who do I call? And it's like all these intricacies that make you feel like you know what you're doing, even though you know the patient care part. It's just everything else that makes you kind of feel like you don't know what's going on.
yeah.
One thing that I used to do, I don't think I ever told you this, Amy, but when I would start a new hospital, I would literally have a notebook and I would write down people's names and what they looked like to help me remember. So I'd be like, Adrienne, awesome long blonde hair, or like Amy. I'd write down what people look like, but you can't do that anymore. I don't even know, like, would you just kind of look down, try and catch a glimpse of their name tag to figure out who they were? Or would you just have to be like, sorry, what's your name? When you don't know
I mean,
someone.
I've had to a couple times be like, I'm sorry, I'm new to this hospital. Can you please tell me what team you're with? And some people are really nice about it, and some people are like, I'm blah blah blah, and then they like go on about. Most people have been very nice though, because they know there are a lot of people orienting right now. They're aware that the hospital is, has a lot of new hires. But the other funny thing is that in my cohort, I was the only non-new grad. And so there have been a few people that have talked to me like, I don't know my ass from a hole in the ground. And so I've had to just kind of bite my tongue and just say, okay, thank you for telling me that, even though I'm like, I've been doing this longer than you. But that's not what's important. Like, it's not a like a measuring contest here. So most of the time I'm just like, okay, thank you for showing me. But there was like the one of the fellas who worked uh for the IV team was trying to like show me how to troubleshoot this port after he had to come up like the third time to try to draw off of it. And he was like, let me show you. And I was like, sure. And just let me let you know, we tried this and this and this. And he was like, great, then I don't have anything to teach you. It sounds like you did everything right. I appreciate that. Or, I had somebody else say, like, I was giving a report and she was like, you don't sound like a new nurse. And I kind of giggled and I was like, well, I'm not. Thank you. So
It's so
people
weird
can
how they would
tell.
equate. Yeah, it's weird how they would equate that you're new to the location versus new as in terms of an
And
experience,
I think
right?
it's just because, there are a lot of brand new grads coming in and, they can only see this much of my face. And I don't know, I guess that's good. I guess that means that my forehead
Take it
hasn't
as a
totally
compliment.
wrinkled up. Yeah, I guess.
Oh my goodness, you're too funny.
I still have stress acne. They're like, "Oh, you young."
Stress acne, please. It sounds like you're having a really good experience. So that's always the positive side, right?
Yes, yes.
All right. Thank you so much for Adrienne for coming on the Gritty Nurse podcast. But yeah, like it's always a pleasure. And I mean, anytime, like you got to come back again, I'm sure.